At first glance, Warren North seemed like the kind of place history would pass by without a second thought, an ordinary suburb resting in the shadow of the Dandenong foothills on the outer edge of Melbourne, Australia. Yet on the cold winter night of August 7, 1993, that quiet stretch of road would become the setting for one of the most haunting and controversial UFO encounters in Australian history. That evening, Kelly Cahill and her husband, Andrew, were driving to a friend's house when Kelly noticed something deeply unusual in a field beside the road, a ring of orange lights glowing in the darkness. It was strange enough to leave an impression, but not enough to stop their journey. They continued on, perhaps assuming that whatever they had seen would fade into the background of the night, like some trick of distance or shadow. Hours later, when the Cahills began the drive home at around 11:45 p.m., the mystery was no longer distant. As they approached the same place again, the lights had returned, but now they were no longer resting harmlessly in the landscape. Suspended above the roadway was an immense spherical object, said to be roughly the size of a house, its lower edge encircled by glowing orange lights. In an instant, the object shot away at extraordinary speed, as if it had never belonged to the earth beneath it. But the encounter was not over. A brilliant light suddenly flooded through the windshield, and then came the most unsettling part of all: silence, stillness, and a rupture in time. The couple found themselves sitting in a motionless car, disoriented and unable to account for what had just happened. When they finally made it home, they discovered the drive had taken more than an hour longer than it should have. Somewhere in that lonely darkness, a piece of the night had simply vanished. The strangeness followed them home. Kelly discovered a peculiar triangular mark on her stomach, a detail that would only deepen the unease surrounding the event. For weeks afterward, both she and Andrew struggled to remember what had taken place during that missing stretch of time. Then, gradually and without hypnosis, fragments of memory began to surface. Strange humanoid beings, glowing red eyes, and for Kelly, the terrifying conviction that she had been taken aboard an unidentified craft. In the months that followed, she also reported further nocturnal experiences, vivid, lifelike episodes in sleep that seemed less like dreams than echoes of something unfinished. By itself, the case might have been grouped with the many abduction narratives that emerged during the 1990s, marked by lost time, inexplicable marks, and fragmented recollections. But what elevated the Warren North incident into the ranks of Australia's most famous UFO cases was the presence of other witnesses. Around midnight, 3 additional people traveling through the same area also reported seeing a massive object with orange lights hovering above the road. Their descriptions closely matched the Cahill's account, lending the story a chilling weight. Whether interpreted as evidence of an extraordinary event or as one of the great unsolved mysteries of modern Australia, the encounter at Warren North has endured because it unfolded not as a solitary vision, but as a shared brush with something that defied explanation. Stephenville, Texas, lies roughly 2 hours northwest of Dallas, set among the ranches, dairies, and open fields that have long defined this part of the state. For generations, it was known less for spectacle than for steady agricultural life, a place locals proudly and with unmistakable Texas confidence called the milk capital of the world. Yet on the evening of January 8, 2008, that quiet identity was abruptly interrupted. In the span of a single night, Stephenville became the center of a mystery that would draw national attention, as hundreds of residents reported seeing an enormous unidentified object moving across the sky above their town. Among those who later described what they had seen was Steve Allen, an experienced pilot accustomed to judging distance, speed, and movement in the air. At about 6 o'clock p.m., Alan was on a hill clearing brush with three other people when an immense object, marked by brilliant blue-white lights, swept in from the western horizon. What startled the witnesses was not only its presence, but its scale. Alan said it appeared bigger than a Wal-Mart, while others estimated that it stretched as much as half a mile across and perhaps a mile in length. Hovering above Stephenville, the object seemed to pause over the town, its lights shifting in intricate patterns that gave the unsettling impression of deliberate motion, almost as if the craft were signaling to those below. The episode grew even more dramatic moments later. Two F-16 fighter jets roared low over the hill, flying directly toward the object in what many witnesses interpreted as an attempt to intercept it. Then, in an instant, the strange craft accelerated and vanished into the distance with astonishing speed. To Alan, who had spent years flying small aircraft and believed he understood the limits of conventional aviation, the object's movement defied easy explanation. He estimated that it was traveling at well over 3,000 miles an hour, far faster than the pursuing fighters could match. By the following day, the story had moved beyond rumor. The local newspaper published an account of the sighting, and soon dozens of additional residents came forward to say they too had seen the object, and in many cases, the jets that appeared to be chasing it. The Air Force initially denied that any of its aircraft had been operating in the Stephenville area that night, and suggested that the reports could be dismissed as misperception or optical illusion. But that explanation did not hold for long. Within a week, officials revised their statement and acknowledged that F-16s had in fact been flying over Stephenville on January 8. What, if anything, the pilots themselves observed was never publicly explained. That silence only deepened the mystery. Whether the object was an undisclosed military test, something extraterrestrial, or some other phenomenon entirely, the Stephenville sighting entered modern American folklore as one of the most striking and contested aerial encounters of the early 21st century, and one whose full story remains hidden from public view. In the pre-dawn darkness of July 24, 1948, as the United States was settling uneasily into the opening tensions of the Cold War, an Eastern Airlines DC-3 moved steadily through the night sky on its route toward Atlanta, Georgia. At the controls were pilot Clarence Chiles and co-pilot John Whitted, seasoned airmen accustomed to long hours, shifting weather, and the ordinary mysteries of nighttime flight. The sky that morning was unusually calm and clear. Moonlight filtered through high, scattered clouds, casting a pale glow over the landscape below and lending the heavens an almost deceptive stillness. It was in that quiet, at approximately 2:45 a.m., that the routine of the flight was abruptly shattered. Chiles noticed a dull red glow suspended above and ahead of the aircraft, strange enough to demand his full attention. As he watched, an unknown object emerged from that glow and hurtled toward the DC-3. He immediately called Whitted's attention to it, and together, the two men stared at the object for 10 to 15 unforgettable seconds as it flashed past their aircraft and then climbed sharply upward at extraordinary speed until it vanished from sight. What Chiles and Whitted described in the aftermath of the encounter only deepened the mystery. According to both men, the object was cigar-shaped, immense in scale, perhaps 100 feet long and 20 to 30 feet in diameter. Along the side facing them ran 2 rows of windows, illuminated with a fierce, almost blinding light. At its rear, flames appeared to pour from the tail, giving the craft the look of some fiery machine from the future rather than anything familiar in civilian aviation. Yet even in the shock of the moment, neither man first leapt to the fantastic. Both assumed they had glimpsed some kind of secret experimental military aircraft, what Chile's memorably described in plainspoken language as a new army jet job. Their reaction reflected the era itself. In 1948, with military innovation accelerating and public awareness of advanced aircraft growing, the extraordinary did not immediately suggest aliens so much as hidden technology. Most of the passengers aboard the DC-3 slept through the incident, unaware of the drama unfolding beyond their windows, but one passenger, C.L. McKelvey, later reported seeing a bright streak of light flash past. On the ground, meanwhile, there appeared to be a possible corroboration. At Robbins Air Force Base near Macon, Georgia, the crew chief on duty observed a brilliant light racing overhead at high speed, a detail that gave the encounter additional weight and helped elevate it beyond the status of a mere cockpit illusion. The Chile's-witted sighting quickly became one of the most discussed aerial mysteries of its time, arriving at a moment when Americans were already primed to wonder what, exactly, was moving through their skies. The late 1940s had seen a surge of interest in so-called flying saucers, fueled by widely publicized incidents and by the dawning realization that the modern age was producing machines and weapons once thought impossible. Against that backdrop, the account from two professional pilots carried unusual authority. The Air Force's Project Sign, one of the earliest official efforts to investigate unidentified flying objects, examined the case closely and ultimately contributed to an internal estimate of the situation presented to Air Force Chief of Staff Hoyt Vandenberg. That report reportedly suggested that the objects observed in several major sightings, including those involving Kenneth Arnold, Thomas Mantell, and now Chiles and Whitted, might be extraterrestrial in origin. Publicly, however, officials promoted a far less dramatic explanation, insisting that what the two pilots had encountered was most likely a meteor. For many observers, this answer felt insufficient, even dismissive, and it did little to quiet public curiosity. Instead, the gap between the seriousness of the witnesses' testimony and the simplicity of the official explanation helped fuel a growing suspicion that the Air Force knew more than it was willing to admit. In that sense, the Chiles-Whitted case became more than a strange sighting in the Georgia night. It became an early and influential chapter in the history of American UFO belief, official secrecy, and the enduring tension between eyewitness testimony and government reassurance.